Don't be clever, be clear. Good communication is both visual and falsifiable. What I see a lot of times in strategies is, oh, this is going to create all these great outcomes. I don't see how it will fail. Always challenge, like, what's the opposite? What could fail? Because it can. So it's always good to be ahead of it.
What's up, everyone? Thanks for joining us for another episode of the podcast. For this one, I am so glad to have a dear friend. And I really mean this when I say, sometimes you have guests on a show or podcast and they start talking about this person's their friend and they don't really know each other that well. That is not the case, because this guy, though we've only spent time together once, it was over an entire week in the wilderness of Canada for hours and hours and hours on boats, out on a barge in the middle of the waters, fishing. And so this is my good friend, Eric. Eric, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
What's up, Tay? I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, man. So for those of you who, if you've not met Eric, you don't know anything about him, I'm more than honored to introduce him to you. Eric is a product marketer, broadly speaking, but he's had the opportunity to work with, correct me if I'm wrong, Amazon, Microsoft, businesses like that, helping them when it comes to their language, how they're communicating to their market, and so really helping their messaging and all that stuff. And Eric, I've been noticing, just real quick, because I wanted to bring this up. I have been loving what you've been doing on LinkedIn with tagging some of these big companies, big tech businesses, and doing this impromptu audit on their messaging and their communication. So just tell me a little bit about what got you doing that, kind of into that space.
Yeah, well, I call them marketing autopsies, because most of the time their landing page, which is what I'm typically critiquing, it's dead on arrival.
Yeah.
So in large part, it's because a lot of tech companies hire me when their product story stops selling. And so I'm trying to take all those years of experience and just put it out there and calling people out on the mat, as it were. I'm calling out, startups, big guys, little guys, in between. And it's been fun, but here's the thing. I'm doing it for me. I'm really just trying to say, hey, look, your copy could be a little bit better. Ultimately, they've got really good products. Yeah. They're just not speaking clearly. And so that's what prompted me, when you're sitting around and you're like, I'm not being myself online. I'm not being my social media self, which is, as much as you can be yourself. There's an element where I was like, this is it. I'm kind of the asshole in the room that will call out your landing page. But most of the time, I'm pretty nice.
Yeah. Dude, I love it because it is such a bold position to take. At first, I thought when you were doing it, maybe they initially asked it. I'm like, oh, he's doing kind of like a client case study. And, they're like, oh, go for it. I'm like, man, you really are acknowledging these businesses. And I'm like, you're tagging. But I did see, I think, at least I'm not saying this is the only one. I saw for one of them, the business a couple things. One, I saw for one of them, the business responded in the comments and was like, thanks for this. We're going to get this in line or something like that. And then for another one, a business volunteered for you to do that with them. And so you did a post about that. So overall, I've seen this. What's the response been like? From positive? Have you gotten any cease and desist from any legal teams? Just what's the response been like with this approach?
So yes, I had the co-founder of an organization basically say, wow, thank you for the feedback. We will action on it. And what was interesting is then the chief marketing officer of that company reached out in a DM and said, how did you get to this point? This is really good stuff. And in essence, I'm like, well, you can have a conversation, but then you got to pay me.
Yeah.
But I gave them a couple of free tidbits. It's, simple, what I would say might be obvious to me, tips that they could take. But then, yes, you're right. There was another co-founder of another organization who came on top of that comment and said, hey, I want you to go check out cloud humans, I don't think those kids know what they're doing over there. Wink, wink. And so I said, "You're on." Do. Tapped it up and let it fly. And
That's awesome,
that
man.
that person enjoyed it. So I want to
That's
be
awesome.
clear, I'm not trying to um yeah, I'm dunking on you, but it's because I think the product is good. It's just
Yeah.
getting lost in all the jargon.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's actually something I wanted to say next because I know that can be a little bit, especially if people don't know you, potentially it sounds like an abrasive intro of who you are. But this is what I thought is so interesting about that approach. But then also, even when I met you, and so this might go a little bit into your story and how you got here, what shaped these elements about you. But you clearly are someone that when you talk and when you share and when you are expressing your views about something, it does come from this place of conviction, but I also feel like a lot of compassion from you as well. Anytime we talked, the two of us together, I felt like you were listening to me and you cared what I was thinking. You cared about what I was saying, but it wasn't just in this overly fluffy, oh, wow, everything you're saying, that's great, that's good. You also then were able to push back on things with insight and again with conviction, like you knew what you were talking about. You weren't like handling me with kid gloves. And so take that compliment however you want to take it. That said, do you recognize that about yourself and what got you into having that about you? Because I don't find it very often. I'm going to
Right.
ramble for just a second just before you jump into that, because typically what I find is when somebody is that listener and they're responding, it is more of that hyper empathetic kid gloves, just listening and bleeding with you and, oh, tell me more. And they just kind of sit with you in it. But then on the other side, typically when someone is more of a straight shooter or can push a little bit or dig a little bit more, they do have that edge about them that they give you the hard truth and they don't care. The truth just hurts, deal with it. And so you appreciate their feedback, but you do wish maybe there's a little bit more compassion in there. So just share with
Totally.
me, man, like where that came from, the development of that throughout your life.
Well, thank you. I will take the compliment. It's taken years to get to that point because I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Where did it come from? Boy, all I can say I can point back to my family, and no, I don't mean like it was psychologically scarred by my family. Is what I often would find in my family dynamic is when there were arguments or disagreements, I could see what like the other person was saying, but clearly the two of them were not. And I would just raise my hand and I say, well, Auntie is saying XYZ and you're saying one, two, three. What if we put these together like that? And usually I would get sort of, hey, shut up, Eric, because they're all heated up in the moment. But then they go,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, maybe got a point.
Yeah.
you know, but I was a young kid when I started doing that and would, not always know the nuance. And I think
Yeah.
over time, I just never let that go.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, it wasn't giving advice. I want to be clear because that's not what I like to do. It's just like I don't want to see people I care about tangle, or
Yeah.
in my professional world, I definitely don't want to see them tangle. But you, sometimes you need that objective person to help you get out of your own way. And
Hmm.
what I've noticed is I've never really had that. I've had a couple of good bosses and mentors, but not someone on a regular basis that goes, "Hey man, kind of being an asshole right now."
Yeah.
Or, "Hey, you're going in this direction and I think you might need to slightly pivot." Whatever the circumstance calls for. It's always been from a place, yes, of compassion, but I just compassion doesn't mean you're milk toast or you should be walked over. It
Mm.
means being kind in the what did you say? You said like there was the edge to it. Like I, I'm gonna be kind, but I'm not gonna cut you with my edge.
Hmm.
And so, the I think the best way to put it is I heard a description about being nice and being kind, which I think fits. Nice is just like you described when people are in there bleeding with you. Oh, it's all right, Tay. I know how you
Hmm.
feel.
Yeah.
Whereas kindness says, hey, that really sucks, but here's kind of how what led you to it. Do you want to fix it? Do you want my help? So that's my long-winded way of saying that's where it started, and that's where I hope it goes, is that distinction between being nice and being
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah, well, that's
Does that
something. I mean,
help?
everything you just, yeah, it does. Well, everything you described, and I'm sure you see it too. It just seems like we are so vacuous of that just across the board. You're talking about watching these arguments and these disagreements between family members, but you being able to see what both sides were saying and wanting to move the conversation forward. And that's something that I've always been drawn to as well, and it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking for me because I feel like so that that is just lacking across the board. And when I try to figure out why am I like that, I can't pinpoint it to a specific like person or influence or thing. Do you think for someone like you and others you've come across it, do you think oftentimes it's either just something you have or you don't have? How can we cultivate that more? Because I think from marketing, so not only is this happening and you and I are both we're entrepreneurs, we're both in this marketing space. Yeah, this can apply to products and services and businesses, but is this not just also a reflection of the human condition where you have this desire or this message or this offer, whatever that you're trying to communicate to somebody, but instead it's getting lost in all of this jargon and this mess and you're not listening. And so that's why I think what we're talking about really has like massive application across the board. Do you think that, again, either someone has this or they don't, or is this something that can be cultivated? And if so, how do you think people can start cultivating that in their own lives?
So yes, I when I'm asked, are you born with it or can you be taught it? I'd say yes to to both.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a complicated and nuanced question. Um, but what you're asking me, I think really comes down to someone having an appetite for two things: curiosity and vulnerability. Now, curiosity, we all sort of understand. Oh, I should probably learn a little bit more before I make a rash decision or spout something. If you were to say something, let's just say negative about a situation I'm in, instead of going, well, what the hell, Tay? I might say, well, what, Tay, how did you get to that thought process, that decision, that opinion? And then you tell me, and then I'm able to respond and go, oh, well, actually, you're missing a couple of details. I did this, this, and this. And you're like, oh, now I, as Tay, have the opportunity to, backpedal or say, I'm sorry, or stand your stance.
Yeah.
But the second part of that is vulnerability, which is sometimes you need to be vulnerable enough to go, I don't know. And yes, I think you have to cultivate it, but I think that's a much longer discussion. But to your original question, I think it takes two things: curiosity and vulnerability.
Yeah. And as you noticed this in your childhood, for you, was there this intentional, you realize that you have this bent, you're seeing the lack of it. And so was it an intentional decision for you that I want to use this skill set to help businesses and other people? Because something that I also want to mention is while this is a big part of what you do, product marketing and helping out those businesses and how they communicate, but I also know as well that you do communication coaching too, just with
Mm.
people and individuals. And so this skill set that you have and this gift that you've been given, is this something that you were intentional with? Hey, like I want to use this as an ongoing way, as a career. This is a passion or a dream of mine. Or was it just kind of this inescapable thing that you weren't trying to necessarily build in that direction, but life you just kept stumbling into it because that's what you were naturally good at?
Wow, Tay, you're coming out with the big gun questions.
I'm sorry. Wait, let me go back. Your favorite color. So is it green
Right.
or blue?
Uh, I think really, I'll just being vulnerable. I think it's because I suck at communication,
Oh, wow.
particularly in
Yeah.
certain parts of my own personal life early on. And I mean, I still do. Like we all flub on communication. Uh, so I think I needed control. Being able to learn about communication and help others gave me a sense of purpose and control and be like, oh, it worked for them. It should work for me. No, it seems to
Yeah.
be a very common theme for a lot of, really high end performers and professionals. They're really good at giving the thing to others, but rarely to themselves. And so that's one big marker that I would say from like my youth is I'm doing this. Yes, maybe it's a gift, maybe, but a large part of it logically was I'm trying to grasp control back for myself so that I can be a better communicator.
Yeah. So what was that journey like? Kind of just give me the history of you going through school, moving into, now you're jumping into careers. What got you to the point where you're leveraging the skill set? And again, now you're having these conversations with businesses like Amazon, like Microsoft. What is that arc in that journey to get there? Mr. I suck at communication, right? And so you're strengthening that. What is that story for you?
Ooh, excuse me, man. I'm a hustler, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Like I got a motor to me. I was hustling straight out of high school. Um, I I had just a short transformational story to share. So I'd gotten in a car accident, and um, everyone was fine, but it was a spark that said, I got to get out of this town where I was growing up, which is Las Vegas.
Okay.
Nothing against Vegas. It's just I had outdone my welcome and it to me as well. And the accident gave me a bit of a small windfall. And I was like, okay, now I can move.
Mm.
That oddly it transformed me to get out of my comfort zone and move. Okay, so I moved to Seattle. Don't ask me how Seattle became a thing, but I can go down there.
Okay. Okay.
But I was working in software retail. I was selling people boxes of software with old school CDs. Some of them even had floppy disks, if you can remember that far. Okay, well, I was starting in college, and I was like, I love software, but not that much. And the place I was working, they offered train people on how to use this new software because it was like, computers were fairly new around this time, in terms of mass. So this
Yeah.
is about 94, 1995. Okay, so I'm like, okay, I think that this is going to help pay for my college and still have some, leisure time. And once I got accepted to be a trainer, boy, did I have to learn how to communicate real quick. Because not only am I training retirees, even just simple mouse clicks, I'm having to break it down so that it's not, what do they call it? You're sort of flawed by your own expertise. I
Mm-hmm.
knew computers quite well, but I had to like unpack it and reverse it and spit it out so that people who don't know computers understood. So I'd say that was a big transformation for me in terms of communication. And one time I had a student, a 82-year-old woman, retiree, of course, uh, in this class. I think we called it Windows 95 intro. She put the mouse down on the ground and started using it like a sewing pedal. So I had to do everything to fight laughter because I wanted to give her empathy, but it was quite hilarious.
Yeah.
And so again, that was just in that moment, in that early career stage, is when I had to learn um, effective communication.
Yeah. As you shared what that stuff like that journey with work, how that was the place that was cultivating the skill in you. I resonate a lot with that. I was a server at a restaurant. Two things that I think have played the biggest influence in my communication and how I communicate with people. One was being a server for years. And so you're having to just approach strangers. Obviously, there's a little bit of context there, but you're approaching strangers, make conversation. I was at a fine dining restaurant. And so people really loved small talk and chit chat about stuff going on. And so being able to engage, carry on conversation, make eye contact, speak loud enough to be heard, but then also not speak so fast that they can't keep up with what's on the menu or the
Mm,
specials you have that night. There were all these little micro skills, these little muscles that were being
yeah.
worked through that. And the second one was education wise. I actually went through nursing school, and what they drill into you at the beginning of nursing school, obviously there are many nurses that, forget these skill sets and these lessons, but you're really in this place when somebody comes in to really triage. Because before, as you know, if you go to any type of an urgent care or a hospital, typically before you see a doctor, you're going to first see a nurse. And it's that nurse's job to kind of figure out and to filter what exactly you need, what's really
Mm,
going on, so they can update the physician with relevant information. So it was this thing of when somebody comes in, your role, you are not the doctor coming in diagnosing and prescribing. Your role is to ask questions. It's to listen, to get a history, what's going on, what's happening, pay attention to body language. What are they doing? Really lean in. And from there, you're starting to filter out the fluff, what's relevant, what's important. You're giving that to the doctor,
yeah.
and then the doctor's the one who's coming in. And so I'm just saying that I resonate so much with what you are sharing, because that had a massive impact, not just with going to nursing school and trying to pass a test or being a server and getting a good tip. It has permanently forged in me communication skill sets,
Yeah.
habits, and practices that I still use to this day when
Yeah.
when talking to people and having those conversations. And so I definitely know what that's like.
Well, let's sit with that for a minute, because I like to celebrate that moment, because what I do, I'm not saving babies, I'm not triaging. So kudos to you. I mean, that's a very tough communication skill,
Yeah.
in that you're you're playing telephone in essence.
Yeah.
If you know that old school game where it's like,
Oh
person
yeah.
says
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
and you got to go tell it to this person. Oh, and someone's life is in your hands. I'm gonna make sure I communicate exactly
Yeah.
correctly
Yeah.
and to the point. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
kudos,
even
man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, even, someone who is like a life mentor to me, I work with them personally. He's a clinical psychologist. He had always used this phrase, and I would at first just kind of nod along, act like I knew what he was talking about. And then, one day I'm like, let me actually Google this real quick to see if I actually know what he's saying. But he would always talk about the importance of identifying the salient issue. And that's the word he'd use,
Yes,
salient. You
of
know,
course.
for those that are listening, you're not aware of the term. It's just fun. It just means what's really the issue. What's the core problem? What's kind of under all of this? What's the main issue at
Right.
play? And that was the biggest thing, because when somebody comes in, it's just funny. Somebody's coming in, you're working as a nurse or whatever. They sometimes they are like they're very composed, and they can come in and just give you the data, the facts that you need, right? But that is not most
Right.
people. Like most
No.
people, they're coming in and they are telling you a whole story, and then this and that and the other. And the whole time, you don't want to be
Yeah.
rude, don't want to cut them off, but you're trying to, again, identify that salient issue, right? Like that main thing. And so it even played into that. But you were talking about, so I just want to kind of hear from you, mentioning that you did say that initially you struggled with communication, younger, and here you are now teaching this class.
Yeah.
Did you notice how that training and that teaching was not just improving and helping your communication at the business you're working in, but did you also see that correlate into just your personal life and how you interacted with people? And if so, what were the things that started changing for you communication wise? Like, what were those weaknesses that started to get strong? What were those transformations that started to happen?
Yeah, I think I, I have not met anyone yet who's about to tell you what I'm going to tell you. So I don't want to sound like I'm some unicorn, unique person. But at a very young age, I was always interested in learning a very specific thing in order to speak correctly about it, or at bare minimum, articulate the very thing I'm trying to say. And when I went into college and I started learning a variety of, just general topics, English, psychology, history, a whole bevy of words and phrases and thought processes came in my brain. And I was like, okay, now I feel empowered. And then when I'd go to say it, it'd be garbage.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I'd always want to be empowered. I didn't know, I was trained, hey, you got to get a formal college education to really understand how that works. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Let's do that. But I think it was the mix of that and live training. Like you mess up live.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think it was some of the book smarts and the street smarts helped me. So you ask in the personal world, yes, I became a little more patient with the type of person who meanders in their conversation. And you're like, where the hell is the salience here? I know it's in there somewhere. And so I became
Yeah.
this archaeologist of get to the point. So, but I very early on in my 20s, I was like, oh, if you meandered, I wanted to slip my wrists.
Yeah.
Not physically, but I was just like, get to the
Understand.
point.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
my larger point is over time that first career path helped me kind of slow down and let people breathe and say the thing that they want to say.
Yeah. Now, is there from that point when you're doing that, was it a fairly straight line to what you are now currently doing? Or were there
Oh, hell no.
transitions into, yeah, like, so what was the, so yeah, like, cause I'm like, you went from, at first I started training people on how to sell this computer product. And then I moved to teaching people how to sell whole computers, and now I'm consulting Amazon. So yeah,
Yeah.
what was a little bit of that journey to get there?
So just to give you some background, uh, I did go to college in Las Vegas for a little bit before the accident, and I thought I was going to continue with creative writing with a minor in psychology. And then when I came to Seattle, I studied film production. I thought I was going to be a producer. Really the business side of film. Well, what was interesting at that time, digital was making its way, but it was still kind of clunky. There was still some film. There still was some digital. You complain about rendering today. Back then, it could have taken weeks just to
Wow.
render a
Yeah,
10-minute video. So
I'm sure.
uh, that's when I started to see some patterns in the industry that, content was going to become king. You need to be able to make your own content, but we didn't quite know what that was yet because the internet was still super chunky and slow.
Yeah.
And so I needed to then, basically, I became a producer at Microsoft. I was like one of the youngest producers out there.
Mm.
Now, to be clear, what my role was at its highest point was to help run shows when they would launch their products or do big conferences. It's not really sexy like going out and making a commercial or a music video, but it's the same process.
Yeah.
You have a budget, you have above the line folks, below the line folks, you got to get people together, unions. That's where I started to see some of the communication. Whoa, I see, like, I have to switch communication styles. Like when I work with the union, it's a little more loosey goosey, let the curse words fly. But when you're working with some of the key clients who are paying for the budget, there's a lot of acquiescence. Yes. Oh, sure,
Yeah.
we can do that. I'm going to have to gently push back on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of
Hmm.
feeling or reading the room, as they say.
Yeah.
And then I kind of started to see that airplane, get lift, as it were, in my communication skills.
That's awesome. And so, well, dude, tell me about in Microsoft doing the being a producer there. Like, did that lead into other opportunities with Microsoft? Is that just kind of what you focused in on, and then from there you transitioned? So just yeah, just kind of more about your journey with the company.
Well, it took a pivot because I had my first daughter, and a lot of travel did not mix well with a newborn.
Ah, yeah.
Um, and so I actually pivoted into another company called Corbis. Now, Corbis was one of the first online image retailers. So you think of like Getty Images or Adobe Stock.
Okay. Okay.
Corbis and Getty were like the only players in town. So I was like, okay, this is fascinating. I want to get into photography and understanding the IP behind it, royalty free and limited usage and just understanding how it works. Well, we ran into an issue selling images online. It took too many clicks. Lo and behold, I'm all of a sudden in UX world. I'm in UX UI design. It was a fairly brand new discipline. And so I met a mentor of mine who got me into it, and I quickly grasped into it. And then later, I moved away from Corbis and got into the startup world. And I started taking a lot of that experience, of the UI UX that I had learned about and applied it to really boring products. The company I was with, this startup, I mean, it was boring, boring, boring. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to
Yeah.
bore you any further, but in the world that I live in, we call it enterprise software and architecture. And already I can feel people falling asleep. But the point is it was exciting for me because then I had to lead a team. Now I started leading a team globally. I had a team in India, team in Australia. We had folks, of course, across the US, and just trying to figure out, well, how do I make this work? So I'll stop there because that's a
Wow.
lot to take in.
Yeah. I
So the
mean, well,
career path went career.
yeah, well, especially, I mean, then too, since we're kind of been on this thread of communication, needing to manage teams across the globe. So you're dealing with different cultures and different languages. I mean, all of that stuff. Not that you were, being multilingual and speaking to all of them and,
No.
these, five different languages, but just
Yeah.
nonetheless, there's now that just very practical or very literal communication barrier, not just like hey,
Yeah.
I'm talking to you, you're talking to me,
Correct.
we're having a hard time just messaging this the right way to the market. No, a literal communication barrier, but needing to navigate that and how to communicate that
Yeah.
to people kind of across all over. Well, is there, because I know you, since you are working in the tech space,
Yeah.
and now it's making a lot of sense just why there is a big focus or big reach you have there, because you've just been in that ecosystem for
Yeah.
forever, in
Yeah.
some way. When you are dealing with brands and businesses that do have a much broader reach, that global reach and that global impact,
Yeah.
are have you have you worked with people that do have that type of a footprint? And if so, I mean, because obviously, you're doing stuff like Amazon. How do you message when like that's the dynamic that you're dealing with? Because I've helped people with messaging stuff, but like all of my clients, for the most part, you're not even talking like national markets, like local markets, right? And so it's just figuring out how people in a few zip codes are communicating.
Yeah.
How do you even start thinking through communication when this is going national and even international? Are there some principles at play, questions you're asking? How do you navigate that?
Well, look, commend yourself for the work that you do because even communicating local markets is very tough. So
Sure,
just
yeah.
because I'm behind a big brand, in part I kind of have a leg up because they've already established a lot of their brand. So in all
That's
fairness,
true.
you're having to do a lot of the heavy lift
Yeah.
in creating something net new, which is totally commendable. What I would say to your core question is, yeah, we got to be careful, especially when we're communicating to a global market or even to regional market. But part of my role is, I think, again, I want to be careful using that term unique, but I, I'm not always the traditional product marketer as
Hey, well, and also let's just
so.
go look, you're on Maverick Culture
Yes,
podcast,
thank
man.
you.
I mean, just embrace it. I'm
I
bringing
will
the Mavericks on, so just run with it, man. You're
100%.
unique. You're a Maverick. Tell me more.
All right, so let's not use unique. I'm going to be a maverick marketer.
I like
So
it. Let's go.
what I was going to say is to the core question, I have two roles. I write internally and I have to write or communicate externally. Externally is a little bit easier because usually these brands have their own guidelines. So they
Okay.
have their own tone of voice established. And so I just take that tone of voice and I figure out how to make it work. Internally, what I'm trying to do is work with sales, and sales is telling me, I'm not going to sell that crap. I would never say those words that are actually out there on that web page. And I'm like, yep,
Yeah.
okay. So how would you say it? And then I'm doing product research, but I'm serving my customer. I'm doing design thinking or human centered design. I'm really unpacking. Okay, what is the salesperson doing throughout the day? Well, maybe in Amazon, they're out there in the field trying to sell Amazon's cloud service, AWS, or,
Yeah.
maybe they're like with Pokemon, they're out there trying to sell the next cool game.
Yeah.
Whatever that set of sales teams are doing, I'm supporting them. I'm their voice, if you will. I'm their advocate to come back to marketing and say, hey, marketing, you got to get your head out of your butt. I know you like writing words, but we got to make a talk track for the salespeople so that they feel comfortable going out and pitching it. So that's my distinct role that I play is that translator between what
Okay.
sales will do and what marketing can create.
Okay, well, so I'm genuinely fascinated in this. Okay, and the reason why is I would love to get perspective from you and advice since I do work with people that are a little bit more on the ground, but some of them will have some sales reps and some sales teams. I remember like the first time I was learning about copywriting, it's like there's this common quote in the copywriting world that copywriting is just sales in print, and that kind of is
Yeah.
this idea that fills the ecosystem. So one of the things that a lot of people encourage, and again, there's obviously a bit of a difference between a local business or a smaller business between their marketing and sales because things are a little bit closer. The telephone game is not as big, for example,
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
something that's a bit broader. But given your experience and skill set, I lean heavily on hearing from sales teams and salespeople, like what is working on the ground, and
Mhm.
letting that play a significant role in how we're communicating and shaping messaging on the website, social media, emails, things of that nature. How do you filter when you hear if you have a salesperson saying, "Hey, like this is what I'm saying, and I'm driving sales, it's working on the ground." But then you have marketing over here with, hey, well, this is what we're communicating. Here's what we've developed. And like you said, you're playing both roles in developing that messaging, the external, but then also the internal. How do you assess a salesperson coming to you saying, this is what I'm saying and this is how I'm saying it? And you either give some pushback and, okay, I know that maybe that's what you like to say and how you like to say it. However, this is the brand. And, we do want to make sure we communicate that versus when do you go, Thank you, salesperson. That's actually a point, or that's a great insight. I didn't think about that. We need that on the website, or we need that in the next email or social media post that comes out. How are you filtering when to push back or when to take it in and let it impact? And again, vice versa from both sides.
Hmm. Okay, so you're trying to get an answer to a very complex situation. So let's just put that out there. But
Yeah.
it sounds like you're trying to get at what's my decision making process, um,
Yes.
in terms of, well, I want to be clear. Sometimes we can't give salespeople permission or lack of permission to say certain things, only insofar as they're not overpromising. Oh, like feature X is gonna take your pet for a walk. Well, hold
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
We can't say that. Like there's certain things like we can't legally say if it doesn't
Yeah.
do it. Uh, so I'm more on the side of if you're fitting within what our product does or the service, speak how you want to speak. Usually the proof is in their sales,
Yeah.
and then that's what I look at. If they're crushing their sales number and they're still getting feedback, that's the set of individuals I actually want to listen. Like what we would call the voice of the customer. Now we can't always talk to the customer, so we try to get that through the salesperson. So I've not really been in a ton of situations where I've had to tell a salesperson no. Definitely tell marketing no a lot. But where
Yeah.
marketing tends to be more rigid, it's don't move the logo, don't change the colors, and
Mm,
for the most part, please don't change these words. Like if a feature's called Luminex 2027, you can't fiddle with that. So
yeah.
in the most part, most of them are flexible. What it comes down to is how responsive marketing and the product team are. So for example, if feature Lumix Seto 2027 is not quite cutting the mustard, we need a roadmap for when it's going to be better. Um, when can we expect it to be released? Things like that. That's where I think see salespeople often pulling teeth from marketing and the product team. So oftentimes I'm sitting in between that, and I work with the product team, and I say, "Hey, what can we commit to?" And usually they're telling me, "Buzz off, marketing person."
Yeah.
And so we have to find a happy medium. So that can come into the form of an FAQ or a generalized roadmap. And that's usually enough to sort of calm everybody down, because at least the salesperson can go back to their clients or customer base and say, I know you like this feature and you'd like it to be better. We're not quite there yet, but we're probably going to get there in the next, cycle or 6 months or quarter, whatever terminology they use.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you would put, if there is a salesperson who their numbers are being backed up, they're producing, there's feedback that's there, you're gonna put some weight on that. And if you see a
Yeah.
disconnect between what the salesperson is saying versus what's being communicated in some of the marketing collateral, you are going to advocate for, hey guys, have we considered, or maybe we should look into this? Would you advise, or basically what I'm getting at is, if there's someone listening to this and they do have that sales rep and they are doing that marketing, would you encourage them to find that person, to hear from them, and to put some significant weight in what they're saying and how they're saying it? Like you said, there's parameters to fit. But
Yeah.
if that is happening, they should really strongly consider integrating that into their marketing communications.
Yes. In short, you should, I, if you're a marketer with your salt, you have
Mhm.
to listen to your customer. If you cannot speak to them directly, your salespeople are the second best conduit to that.
Great, because that was going to be my very next question.
Okay.
How much of weight are you putting on sales versus customer, right? And let me give just a little bit of background why I'm asking this.
Okay.
I've heard from some market research people, like this is what they do.
Mhm.
Within certain pockets of them, again, I'm not hearing this universally, but just in pockets, I'll sometimes hear you can't rely on that. Your customers don't know what they want. They don't know how to give the right responses. They don't know how to. So it's like they're kind of almost casting doubt or skepticism towards what a customer might say. So I wanted to hear from you.
Yeah.
What weight do you put on customer feedback? And again, it is a complicated question because it's still that decision making question. I know not everything a customer says is gold or everything they say is crap. But again, get me into some of your headspace when it does come to encouraging someone to listen to a customer. What should they be listening for?
Uh-huh. What they should be listening for. Well, okay, we need to back up just a little bit.
Okay,
So
great.
with much of marketing research, it comes down to two types generally:
Okay.
primary and secondary research. Okay, this is why I'm gonna get nerdy on you for a little bit. So
Mm.
primary research is just all the research you're doing yourself on behalf of the company. You're not you're not going outside and paying someone to do the research for you. Well, you could. So I'll hold my tongue on that. But ultimately, you're trying to do research that's you're making it out of thin air. You're having to go out, talk to customers. Maybe you're testing a market. You're talking to your salespeople. Then there's secondary research, which is all existing surveys on other products or products like yours or services like yours. Maybe you're looking at magazines, you're looking at teen or youth culture, and you're like, I think I know, I'll pull from skateboard culture and slap that on my product. And it's like, okay. So the distinction is that when there's primary research, like the marketing team goes out and research, most of them are really careful about bias, because you don't want to go in and say, so you like my product, right? You want to be careful about that, because then that will give you poor answers from the customer. Customers often, I want to be careful here, but they lie. Even the most well-framed set of research questions, survey, field tests, or gathering people into a workshop, they will lie. Oftentimes because certain questions or scenarios are framed in a way where it might expose them as being lesser or not as intelligent, or maybe some other undesirable word. So this happens a lot in focus groups, because you're in a room with a bunch of strangers, and then you want to look like, heck yes, I like this flavor of Doritos, when deep down inside you want to just dunk on it, as an example. So really good researchers will start to identify when you have to be in the room. You kind of have to read that. So to the core question, it's the decision making is, what's the intent of the research, particularly from the voice of the customer, and what can you glean by being in the room? So then from there, that's usually when a salesperson is the good filter, because it can get expensive to go out and do research via the marketing team. So your salespeople, they can land and expand, they can scale. And what I've done in the past is I take the voice of the customer via the salesperson, because they're a pretty good filter. They're kind of like, yeah, Tay said that this feature kind of blows. It's terrible. But when I sit with him throughout the day, Tay uses it all the time. So does it really blow? What he unpacks for us is that it's not that it blows, it's that he wished that it was just a little bit faster or a little bit something. So then we would take those different conversations from the sales reps and say, okay, what are the patterns that are emerging? What are the common themes? Oh, this one feature gets complained about a lot. Well, what's really going on under there? Then I can start to decipher what's reality and what's a mixed message from my voice of customer.
That's
Does that
great.
help?
Yeah, it does. So it's almost like if someone had all of these parts in place, if they did have, well, obviously you're going to have your customers, but then if you had that filter, that person who's on the front line of the conversations, and just as heads up, obviously if people are listening, even if you don't have a sales team, maybe you have a front desk person who is
Yeah,
on the front line of
100%.
those conversations and
Yep.
interfacing with the customer, or you can insert whatever relevant player, maybe that is you as the business owner. But if you could really, an ideal scenario is blending the two together, hearing from the customer, filtering it through the sales team, that'll start to create this framework that you feel strong about. Like, okay, I think we're starting to triangulate on what we need to say and what we need to
Right.
stop saying.
Yeah. Yep. And I want to hone in on that word framework. That's very crucial because a framework is not a set of rules.
Yeah.
So I don't, you mustn't get in these hardened set rules about how I get market research. But there's frameworks, there's guardrails. And as long as
Yep.
you can bounce off those guardrails, but do what makes sense. And you hit it spot on. It's like, who's the front desk person? If you run a chain of restaurants, your front staff, or even if someone's out wiping the table and they overhear someone like, man, this chicken sucks. And you'd be like,
Yeah.
put those feelers out there. It's important.
Yeah, I I would almost put a premium on someone overhearing that candid conversation,
For sure.
and saying that, the chicken sucks, because that's obviously a big thing, like you mentioned, when it does come to customer feedback. Really, the reason why it may not be as reliable, like you were saying, is because, is this really the truth? Is this really how they feel? So it's
Yeah.
almost like the more you can capture the candid, the you
Right.
didn't, they know they're not being watched, if you will. They're
Mm.
comfortable. Like, the more you can create that kind of a space, then the better that feedback's going to be. Well, as we kind of bring things towards the end, what I would like to settle in on, as you have been in these spaces, you have been working with these different businesses, and now as you're on LinkedIn and you're going to websites and doing these autopsies, what encouragement or advice could you give to, whether it's someone that is a marketer and they're working with other businesses and they're trying to get better at crafting better messaging, communication, or it is to the business owner? Are there regular patterns and mistakes that you're noticing that could translate to a lot of businesses and a lot of people? I know you specialize in the tech space, but
Yeah.
broadly speaking, are there some general principles and some practices that 80% of the time a different business can take that and integrate that into how they're looking at their communication?
Yeah, and don't let the tech space fool you because a lot of the same marketing principles and communication principles apply across many industries.
Yeah.
Um, Boy, I think the biggest pattern that comes up, and it sounds so cheeky, but don't be clever, be clear. Meaning, let's not try and say, uh, we're the most tastiest chicken masala in South Jersey. Okay. Well, the problem with that is good copywriting or even just good communication is both visual and falsifiable. And what I mean by that is, does it spur up a sense of, can I see it? Okay, I can kind of see chicken masala, but it being the best, I have no way of proving if it's the best unless I go to every single place in South Jersey, which
I like
could.
that. I like that. I've never heard somebody bring that up. Is it falsifiable? I like
Yeah.
that a lot. Okay, keep going,
So
keep going.
yeah, no, you got it. So one good example is from New Balance. I don't know how old the ad is, but it says New Balance, worn by models in London and dads in Ohio. Like, it's visual, and I could probably falsify it. I can probably go
Yeah.
to London and see like
Yep.
a really attractive model
Hmm.
after a show, chilling in the New Balance, and same with the dad, you know, mowing the yard.
Yeah.
It's that advice that I was given a couple of years ago, where I was like, it just clicked. That's how we should write. The other thing I would say in terms of just not being clever, be clear, is going back to that curiosity. Um, just okay, now that you wrote the thing or you've come up with this marketing strategy, how do you think it's going to play out? Like, if it a lot of times a lot of strategies, if you will, which are really just another way of there, it's a plan. A plan is a strategy is really deciding on the game you're going to play, and the plan is how you play it. And so what I see a lot of times in strategies is, oh, this is going to create all these great outcomes. I don't see how it will fail. So a lot of times when I write my strategies, I say, here's how it will fail. So if I'm Uber, I'll say, well, Lyft's going to take over 12% of the market. Lyft has nicer drivers or more pleasant experiences. Whatever the thing is in your market,
Yeah.
always challenge, like, what's the opposite? What could fail? Because it can and it will.
Wow.
So it's
That's
always good to
brilliant.
be ahead of it.
That's brilliant. I'm actually I'm onboarding a new client right now, and I am definitely we are in that kind of strategy looking forward. What are we going to do? What's the
Oh,
plan?
okay.
And I've never thought about that, integrating that into that conversation and into that strategy, because it provides this kind of, like, I don't know, even as you're talking about that, it makes it really clear. It makes it, what it does is it creates stakes. That's what it
Yeah.
creates.
Yeah.
And we talk about using that in marketing communication, the importance of creating stakes, creating that sense of tension of, okay, I understand what could be lost if I don't engage with this offer, if I don't. But I've never thought about weaving that into the strategy to create this sense of commitment and urgency and clarity with implementation. I love that. I'm definitely going to integrate that now.
Uh,
Well played.
well played. Well, I would take it even a step further, is that marketing on the whole, it has a lot of workable things. You know how to pull the social media lever, you know how to
Yep.
look at some of the vanity metrics. I mean, they kind of, it works depending on how well, that's a different question, but they work generally. The failure question is going to really challenge you. But then I would ask you to take it a step further,
Okay.
is how do you overcome that failure? In essence, what's your plan B? Um, and it doesn't mean you have to like spend a ton of money. Just be clear on it. Write it down. Okay, well, if I don't hit this goal by this date because of this reason, what should I be doing? And I can't give you that answer, obviously, because it's in the moment and
Mhm.
it's very contextual. But
Yeah.
that's the pattern I'd like to see more of my colleagues or my peers doing. And if you're out there and you're doing it, great. The
Yeah.
rest of you, you know what's up.
Well, last thing I'll ask you, you're talking about, don't focus on being clever, focus on being clear. I think
Yeah.
internally, a lot of the concern or the pushback when someone thinks to themselves, okay, be clear, is they're worried they're going to be boring or generic. And so when they think about marketing and they think about, to them, it's about standing out, saying something different. How would you speak to that business owner? What encouragement, what advice would you give them when that objection, that concern comes up? Yeah, like, Eric, I want to be clear, but what if I just end up being boring and generic?
Well, I'll go back to the New Balance as an example. Worn by supermodels in London and dads in Ohio. It's sort of clever, but it's very clear. We're
Yep.
talking about shoes being worn by two distinct markets. So what I say about clever is clever for clever's sake. So if you were to give me an example of a local restaurant, again, I'll go back to, I don't know, we got the best chicken this side of the South Jersey. Okay. Well, that's clever. And it's sort of clear, but it's, again, it comes back to it's not falsifiable. So I think you can be clever, but I think what happens is a lot of time clever gets turned into jargon.
Yeah.
Like cutting edge, revolutionary,
Yeah.
AI. Just slap AI in there and you got something. That's my caution. Now, there's a whole bunch of like copywriting tips one can learn from and could borrow from that help them. But what I mean by all of that is that if you can be clever, but I want you to avoid a lot of those clever tricks, which is like the jargon or buzzwords. You know, I think of AG1, which is like that supplement drink. I think it's just all a bunch of vitamins. I'm not too familiar with it, but there was an ad that they had that I really liked. And it went through a couple of iterations. And one of the iterations, it said, take one scoop every single day. Well, that's pretty clear, but it's generic, right? Well, they took it a step further and they said, one scoop once a day, every day. That's kind of clever. Now, how it's clever, it's because it's using a tool, what we call a tricolon, meaning there's 3 separate phraseologies there. One scoop, once a day, every day. And there's repetition. So one, once, day, every. So those are things you can learn over time, but it can be done.
Yep. And I don't know if you would agree with this. I almost feel like it is much easier once you have the clear thing down, even if it is a little generic and a little boring, it's much easier to sex up the generic thing than it is to defluff the jargon. You know,
really going for the sex terms here. I love it. But yes, you're right.
Hey, I had to. Yeah.
It's like that old saying, you can't break the rules until you know them. And so part of that means get clear on what your product or service does, and then find ways to fluff it up.
Yeah, add a nice little touch to it. Well, dude, this was so good for me. I literally which I go into all these like this, but there was a point where I was like, oh, I really need to learn this and to know this because these are real conversations I'm having, man. Okay, so last thing, if someone's listening to this and they want to connect with you more about what you're doing, how do they connect? How do they learn more about it? How do people, if they want to work with you, find your business? Where are you active? So give us all the things, Eric, and we'll be sure to put them in the description.
Yeah, I'd say I'm most active on LinkedIn, which is LinkedIn. I think it's IN/Eric the Coach. You can pretty much find me at most places at Eric the Coach is my website, ericthecoach.com. The only distinction I have is on X, where I've called it Lead Quietly. I couldn't get any other name, but I do a couple of marketing dunks or autopsies on X as well. But yes, reach out to Eric at ericthecoach.com, and I read almost all of my emails.
I love it. Well, look, if any of you are willing to go under the scalpel and get an autopsy done, go on LinkedIn. Find Eric the Coach, but Eric Moore. That's his name. Throw your hat into the ring and get an autopsy. Eric, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for this whole episode. I'm literally going to go back and listen to this one because there's so much that I need to apply right now with clients of mine. That's going to be an absolute gold mine. I'm just going to send this to them and be like, look, guys, he said it, okay? He's the one. We weren't talking about you. All right, now that this has been said. So, man, I appreciate it so much, man. Thanks for being on.
You're welcome.